Hello F11 members and welcome to the post-production video tutorials for issue 96, January 2020. So, yesterday afternoon I was down at a familiar stomping ground for me, down on the beach at Doodle-Dore. Now I photographed Doodle-Dore and the Jurassic Coast more times than I've had hot dinners, quite frankly, but you'll have read, hopefully, in last month's members gallery about a one-to-one session I did with F11 member Mick Jones, where he did a shot standing here looking through the arch as the sun was dipping down. And that shoot inspired me to go back and have a go again at this particular location. I have done it before, but I thought it could be done better. And of course, this time of year, here we are in the winter months, very short days, and the sun going down well to the south of west through the archway there of Doodle-Dore. So the time of year was perfect. Now, on the screen in front of you, you see the image on the left, the finished image. On the right, the raw comes straight out of the camera. I think you'll agree it's quite a radical difference. Now, what amazes me is what information is there in the raw. Let's just go into Lightroom here. And here we've got the shoot. And I was exposure bracketing, anticipating the need to have to exposure merge with this picture because it was shot with the 14mm lens on the full frame mirrorless camera, the Canon EOS R. And of course, I can't use filters with the 14mm lens, so I had to basically shoot, expose for a mid-tone and hope to be able to hang on to shadows and highlight information. But what's amazed me is I haven't needed the bracketed exposures at all. I've been able to work from this one single frame, which on the face of it looks as if it's burnt out in the highlights. But actually, all the information I need is there. And that, of course, makes the post-production much more straightforward because I don't have to worry about merging images where there's been movement of water. Okay, let's start. And before I'm going to wade in here, I'm going to just determine what I want to do. And I'm going to use a technique which I've done many times before in these video tutorials, of make 3 different conversions of this from this one raw file. One for the beach, the darker areas of the picture, the cliffs here and the beach in the foreground. One for the water, and the whiteness of the surf here, and one for the brightness in the sky. And then I'm going to merge them together in Photoshop using layer masking. So let's start. And so the first thing I'm going to do is do my base layer, which I usually work on being the brightest layer. And what I'm going to do now is just, as usual, start with my black and my white points. But in this particular case, I'm not concerned about the bright areas of the pictures. I'm just looking at the foreground really, and the cliffs on the right. And with my blacks, I really don't want to clip any blacks. I want all the detail I can get. So a minimal adjustment there. Same, hold down the Alt key, move the white slider to the right. Now, in this particular case, I'm not concerned with that clipping that's taking part in the sky. I'm just looking at the water and the lower half of the picture, really. Now, if I come back and just hold my cursor over this arrow up here, it shows me what's clipping, and it's just in the sky. That doesn't concern me at the moment, so that's fine. I'm going to go with that. I'm just going to boost my shadows as well. I want some detail here on the beach, in the stonework down there. And I'm going to add a little bit of contrast here. So I'm going to go to a medium contrast on the preset there. And I'm going to boost my vibrance a touch up to about 15, I'd say. I can fine tune that using the shift keys on my keyboard. Okay, and now there was a bit of sea mist, which in a way worked in my favor because it dropped the contrast. Shooting into the light is something that I don't like doing, quite frankly. You've probably noticed I try and avoid it. In this particular case, though, it was it's the shot I was after. But there was a bit of sea mist out at sea, just dropping the contrast, and I think that's going to help me to get a believable image out of this. But that's just causing a little bit of loss of clarity. Can you see it there in the cliffs in the foreground and basically in the distance there? There's obviously a bit of haze taking place on the left of the frame where I'm shooting straight into the sun. As usual, shooting on a beach with waves crashing around my feet, a bit of spray, a bit of mist. Keeping that off the lens is always a bit of a headache, but I did my best. But nevertheless, what I'm going to do is use a grad tool here and hold down the shift key, pull the grad down, and I'm going to use it to introduce a bit of dehaze to deal with, well, that sea mist essentially. I don't want it on my foreground, I really only want it on the cliffs in the distance. So just put a touch of dehaze in there, and can you see about 15 just adds a bit of clarity there to that scene, which I think works fine, works quite well on the cliffs. Okay, click on done now, and I'm now going to export this image and as a 16-bit TIFF and open it in Photoshop. So while I'm doing that, I'll just pause you. Okay, so I've done that, and that's awaiting me in Photoshop. But what I'm next going to do before I is then now work on the create a layer, create an image which will be a layer which is essentially looking at the water. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to look again at my whites, pull those whites back a bit. They're not really affecting the water, but nevertheless I'm going to pull the whites back a touch there. And I'm going to look at my highlights there. I'm looking just at the highlights in the brightest part of the water. Pull back the highlights a bit, about -40 on the highlights there. And what else do I need to do? I'm just going to now look at my tone curve and go back to linear, and now just pull it down a touch just to darken down that area of water a bit there. That looks about right to me. And now I'm going to export that and open it in Photoshop. So let's just do that. Pause you for a second. Okay, now I come back into Lightroom and back into the develop module again, and now I'm looking at creating an image which is based around maximizing the impact of the sky. So in this particular case now, because you can see if I hover my cursor over that arrow key on the histogram, that shows me all the information I'm clipping in that bright sky. So let's pull that back immediately, and you can see that clipping then now comes off. In fact, I'm going to take the whites adjustment right off there. I'm going to pull back my highlights a touch more as well. Now you can see what appeared to be totally burnt out. I can see the setting sun there. I can see detail in the sky. It's quite a moody sky. I'm going to pull back my blacks a bit as well. So if I hold down the Alt key and come in on my blacks there, bit more. I'm not really concerned with the blacks in the beach, but the blacks in the door in the actual arch of Durdle Door are a factor. Now with this, as you can see, there is detail there, despite the fact I'm shooting straight into the light. There is detail there in the arch. Now I could of course really strive to brighten the arch. But if I did that, it would just look wrong, wouldn't it? We're looking into the sun. We don't expect to see bright detail in the arch. So for me, just to have this hint of detail there is enough. We want to have a believable picture that doesn't look weird. Okay, so I've pulled back my highlights, my whites, my blacks. Now let's come back to the tone curve again and just use this to get a sky that looks suitably dramatic without being too over the top. I think something about that, don't you? Maybe a bit more. Yeah, let's go with that. Okay, and now I'm going to export this again as a 16-bit TIFF to open in Photoshop, and then I'll be working on merging them. So here we are in Photoshop, and I have the three images open. We have the bright one here, then the one slightly darker, and the one darkest. And now my job is to merge them together. You could ask why I don't do this all in Lightroom. Lightroom is very proficient, but for this slightly trickier situations, such as this, I find layer masking in exposure merging using layer masking in Photoshop much more flexible. I think then we'll continue that in part 2 of this month's post-production video tutorials. So see you there.